Welcome back to TDK12.net, episode 14, police background checks, or criminal record checks, or police clearances, or FBI clearance, or RCMP clearance if you are Canadian. That is what we're going to talk about today. And it is a big topic, and I am probably only going to scratch the surface. And I'm saying that because a lot of people are in unique situations with this. So what I would like to recommend is give this a listen, take a breath, look at the show notes. I'm going to add extra links in the show notes. The show notes are on YouTube and they are also available in your podcast app, but they're definitely easier to get if you go to the YouTube channel. So after someone gets a new job, they get some type of invitation email, usually from Human Resources or someone at their school, and it has a list of all the steps they need to do. And one of the steps says, criminal background check, and you're like, oh, I can do that, it's just one sentence. And then you realize it's the hardest part of the package, and it is the hardest part of the package. Initially people are like, wait, do I have to do this? Yes, you absolutely have to do it, and it's very time consuming. So you have to start it as soon as you possibly can, and I'll get into that in a minute. Even if you're super keen, you can't always do these immediately, and there are reasons for that. I'd like to give an overview of the new climate, if you will, for police background checks and the basic standards that I've seen over the last few years. In 2014, within the international school community, at a very prominent international school campus, what you would consider a Tier 1 school, because of this situation, new standards were put in place. I will not be going into detail about this situation today. The new standards generally work like this. Schools want background checks, police clearances, whatever they call them in the country that you're in. They want those for every school that you've worked at in a different country for the last 10 years. So if you've worked in the same country and changed schools, that should be fine. Like, you shouldn't need to redo the process. But let's say that in the last 10 years, you went from the United States to Vietnam, and then from Vietnam, you want to go to China. You would need an FBI clearance from the United States, and you'll need a recent one. You can't use an old one. And you would need one from Vietnam in order to get your visa in China. That's generally how they work. Now, your Chinese school, and I'm bringing up China very specifically because it's a big market, your Chinese school may not ask for the FBI background check. They can be a little bit flexible because they are not a member of what's known as the Hague Apostille member countries, and I'll link them in the show notes. There are 117 countries in that list, and they are very strict, and they all follow basically the same process. But countries who are not in that list, they can change their rules whenever they want, and they also, at the company level, can make different decisions because they're not bound by this agreement, right? And China and Vietnam are actually not bound by this agreement, neither is the UAE. But as an aside, the UAE goes above and beyond, and they now let you get police background certificates using an app. So if you've left the country, you can do it. The reason they do that is because they have a lot of expats. So what's happening is, in most of these countries with a lot of expats, they have developed processes and procedures for this. All right. And if the school is an international school plugged into international recruitment agencies like Search or ISS, Search and ISS are going to inform them about the standards. And then when they do accreditation, those accreditation bodies are going to inform them. So I was recently part of an accreditation in China, and we had three accreditation bodies, but let's just say really just two because one was IB. The other two were from different countries, and they both had different standards for background checks for all employees, and they wanted all of them to be done. And HR had employed some people, and they had done background checks, but not to the satisfaction of accreditation. So the school actually paid for all those people to redo all their background checks. And the standard that they implemented kind of for existing employees that needed to redo them was we want every place that you've lived in the last 10 years, so every country you've lived in. And that's kind of when I really started to pay attention to the fact that everyone was really on board with this. US accreditation, European, Asian accreditation bodies, they're all on board with this. So it's important and you have to do it. All right, let's pretend that we're in a good spot right now. You're at a job, maybe it's your first job overseas. That would be perfect for this point in this podcast. You are at your first job and you're listening to this and you're getting ready to leave that job. And if you're normal, you're leaving in June or July. When do you need to request your check in your current country? Usually, the process for getting it is very well defined, and there is a point when you're allowed to schedule it because it expires, so these don't last forever. You want to go as close to the line as possible, but you want to make sure you get it before you leave the country. Never leave a country without your background check in hand. Whatever it's called. Some people are like, oh, but they call them police clearance. Please don't get hung up on that. Whatever it's called, your criminal record check, police clearance, background check, get it before you leave the country. I would say no more than 3 months before you leave and no less than 1 month. If you wait until 1 month out, you could run into a problem because guess what? Every expat that's leaving is going to wait till 1 month out. I remember that in Shanghai, there was a way to do this where we could make an appointment and there was a special center you could go to. And so we worked everything out. We made an appointment and we went and we got everything done. When I first did this in the UAE a long time ago, it wasn't really well developed. And I know people who gave up. They literally gave up because they couldn't find the office. That's not a joke. They could not find the office, so they gave up. And when I finally went to get it done, and to pick it up and everything, it was really, really confusing. And I had to pay. I'll never forget this. I had to pay at 3 different points. It wasn't a lot of money. It was like $1 here, $2 there. But one would only accept cash. One would only accept local cash or local ATM cards. And one would accept ATM cards and credit cards. Now, I had a cash and ATM card. It wasn't a big deal. But I just kept making a mental note of these signs like, what is this? Like, nobody was organized. I think it's changed now. But the point is that this stuff can be hard. And like a lot of things, you might have to go more than once. So waiting until the last month is a big problem. Even if your school is cooperative, and most of them are, a lot of schools are expected to support employees with their background checks because they want to help you leave. It's important that you leave legally and you have everything you need to transition. A school does not want the reputation of not supporting employees with background checks. It's essential in order for that employee to move on to their next job. So the schools will schedule background check trips sometimes. So they'll have people and they'll get them all together and say, you're all going on Wednesday, we're going to get it done. If you can do that and it's like not, less than a month out, it's fine. If it's a couple weeks out when they schedule that, just kind of assume that the HR person doesn't really understand the process, or they're just assuming everything's going to go fine. If you look at that date and it feels a little risky, then you need to potentially do it on your own and choose a better date. Let's say you've done everything right, you've completed your background check, and you've got all your papers, you've had your final meeting with the school, with HR, you're ready to leave. Are you done? No, you're not done. You need to keep everything that you ever received from HR. Everything. You need every contract you've ever had. If you don't have a copy of those, get one before you leave and make them stamp it. If should already have the stamp on it, they should have a copy, but make sure it has the school stamp. You also need to have every ID card you were issued. In most countries, you get some kind of ID card, like an Emirates ID card or an ARC card in Korea. You need to keep that. Now, when you leave the country, they might tell you, they're going to collect it at the airport. All right, well, here's my advice. The most common process I see is when you leave, if you have an exit paper, so this is a visa from your employer saying your visa's been canceled, they take your ID card, they put a hole in it, and then they let you keep it. If you don't have an exit paper, the immigration people are not likely to know that your visa's canceled. Your visa's going to be canceled anyway. And if there's no explicit penalty that has been communicated to you, then you should keep your ID card. You're going to need it in the future. If you cannot keep your ID card, you need to scan it, save that electronically, and you need to print copies of it and put it in multiple locations and make 100% sure you have it. I have not worked in the UAE since 2013. I needed my Emirates ID for paperwork 2 weeks ago from this date. So right now it is February the 25th, 2020. I have not lived in the UAE since 2013, and I needed that ID card 7 years later. So you need to keep everything to prove your employment. You need tax receipts, salary receipts. You need everything. You never know what you're going to need, so you need everything. Sometimes people are like, this job was stupid, and then they throw all their stuff out. This contract was dumb. No, that is part of your paper trail. And if you're an expat, you don't have one. If you've been an expat for a long time, you don't have a paper trail in your own country. And in order to prove that you exist and you've done certain things, you need all of your paperwork. Okay, now we're going to get into the tough stuff. And I'm going to try to do this in one episode. I may have to take pieces of this and just focus on them for another episode. But I want to go through the overview and then see if there's any demand for going further. You left your job. You did not get a background check. Now what do you do? So I'm going to give you the most common and difficult scenario. You left a job in let's say Kuwait. You left a job in Kuwait and you went to a new job in China, and you did that in 2013. So you've been in China for 7 years. And while you were there, the law changed and the standards changed. Now you want to go to Korea. So now you need a background check from Kuwait, a background check from China. And because Korea is part of the Hague Agreement, you're going to need an FBI background check from the United States. So this is what you have to do. You have to take each country and research their process and complete the steps for each country and pay for each country. And your school may reimburse you for part of it. They may reimburse you for all of it. They may reimburse you for none of it. The school that you're going to, it's hard to say. But you have to do that. Country by country, process by process. For every single background check you need to allot 12 weeks. Now, you can do them concurrently, which means you could technically finish 3 background checks in 12 to 14 weeks. But it's going to take at least 12 weeks. I would say in some cases up to 16. And that is if you're willing to spend the money to do it. If you're going to try to do it very affordably and as cheap as possible, you need to give yourself 6 months for each country. Once you start looking into the process, the first gut reaction is to give up. Honestly, I've seen people say, I can't do this, I'm going to quit. That is a mistake. You can do this. It's possible to do. You may need help. If you are really, really bad at paperwork, if you cannot read legal documents, you need to be honest with yourself. So if you're someone who actually cannot read this kind of material, for whatever reason, it doesn't make any sense to you, it stresses you out, it gives you anxiety, and I'm being very serious here, and I know people like this. You need to find someone like me, and I'm not saying you send it to me, I'm saying you find someone like me. I love this stuff. There are people, we love to read this stuff, we like to look at each process and go through it. I'll do it in my free time. It's fun. Yeah, there are weird people like me, we do this. Find someone to help you. Often, people go the wrong way. And one thing they do is they complain to their new human resources. They fire off an email to their school. When you contracted me, you didn't tell me about all this stuff. I don't want to have to do it, blah, blah, blah. That's a huge mistake. When you went to a job fair or when you did the recruitment process, they're assuming that you're aware of the new standards. They're assuming you're aware that you need a background check. You were living in a country, the process changed, that happens, not your fault, but you also are responsible for knowing the standards for your career path. Now you might think, well, I'm just a teacher. No, you're a teacher working in international schools overseas, and within that environment, there are standards that you have to meet. You don't want to work somewhere that's not taking background checks. The next thing people try to do is they try to reach out to their recruitment agency, like, oh, I paid search money, I paid ISS money, they'll help me. They won't help you. They can't help you. The school wants the background check, you have to provide it. So stop trying to find a loophole. If you're looking for loopholes out of this, don't. What you need to do is buckle down, get all the documents together. I would make a folder for each country. I would print off every single step, make a checklist for each country, open the folder, do the checklist, keep all the receipts in the folder, and stay as organized as I can. Now I'm going to jump around here a little bit because this scenario was you left Kuwait, you went to China, China didn't need a background check, you were there from 2013 until now, the rules changed while you were there, and now you need to get the Kuwait background check, the China one, and the US one, because let's say you're a US citizen, and you're going to Korea, so they're part of the Apostille. I'm giving you the worst case scenario here because it's tough. The Kuwait one you'll probably find is pretty easy to do, slow but easy to do. The China one, you'll make an appointment, you'll get a letter from your HR there when you're leaving, and you'll get that done as well. It won't be that bad. It'll be annoying. You'll have to go 2 or 3 times depending on the size of the city. You'll get this huge document. You pay for a Chinese version and English version. Make sure that you pay for an English version. Sometimes if you're going to Korea or Japan, they'll even let you put a Korean or Japanese version in, but you usually don't need that. If your school is only requesting an English copy, don't get another language because they may not reimburse you for that. But because you're going to Korea, you also have to get the FBI check. Now, the second you start looking at how to do the FBI check from China, you're going to run into some stuff. First off, fingerprints. You have to send fingerprints to the FBI. In Shanghai, when I was looking into this, there was one place I could go that could do the fingerprinting. I sat down and went through the entire process, and I realized that if I simply left my job when I was supposed to leave, went straight back to America for the summer, stayed there for the whole summer, I could get all of this done flawlessly. I could pay an agent in America to take the fingerprints and stuff to where they needed to go in DC, and not literally they take it, they walk it in, they get everything done for you, and then they send it back to you, or they'll drop ship it to your job in Korea. And I realized that if something happened while I was in China that slowed the process down, I could be in a position where I had to leave China, but my paperwork wasn't finished, but the paperwork was marked to come back to me in China, or they would have no way to contact me because all the information I put down to start the process was my Chinese address, current Chinese phone number, etc. But if I went back to the United States, I could just do it as a US citizen, and it would be a lot easier. And so I opted to do that. And I had my fingerprints done electronically. There are certain sites that you can go to in most cities, and you get your fingerprints done, and they upload them to the FBI. Like, everything was very, very smooth. All the information was packaged and sent to my school in Korea because I was going to Korea. And my wife's Canadian. She did the same thing in Canada. We split up. She went to Canada. I went to the US. We were split up for a couple of weeks, had everything done. It still took 6 weeks for all this to be done domestically. So I'm telling you that doing it overseas, FBI checks and RCMP checks, is possible with some research and preparation, But if you have an error, fixing that error is going to be slow and it's going to be expensive. My advice is if you need an FBI check or an RCMP check, reach out to your new HR, tell them that you're going to be doing these in the summer when you go home, and you need to plan to spend a summer back in the US or back in Canada and just get it done. You could travel intermittently if you have an agent. Once all your documents are in process, once all that's done, you can leave, go do something and go back if you need to collect it or sign something else, whatever. But you need to go there to start the process. If you want to save a lot of money, then you're going to probably need more than a summer to do it. So in this scenario, I'm spending money for an agent. I'm spending money to overnight packages. Literally everything was overnighted. Overnighting to a government agency means they'll get it within 2 to 4 days. They never get it the next day. I've never seen that happen. It's possible, I guess, but it just doesn't happen. Because the stuff gets to the agency, but it has to be sorted and checked. So it doesn't get to the person who needs it immediately. There are scenarios where you cannot get a background check. And this isn't very common anymore, but it's possible that, so let's say that you were not working in an international school. Let's say you're just working at like a private company. Good example. You were in Japan and you were working as an ALT, like an English teacher in a public school. And then you were working for this company. They're mostly Japanese. Maybe your Japanese is good. Maybe it's not. They're very local. HR processes are very local. And they place people in public schools, but it's not a huge company. And you don't get your background check and you leave. And then you decide later that you need it. And you can't find any way through the process to verify your employment. It should be on file. It's not. Nobody has a record of you. You don't know why. This is not very common, but it can happen. Or you worked in a country that was developing and you were teaching. You weren't making a lot of money, but you loved what you were doing. And you left, and then the country was dissolved. It doesn't exist anymore. Okay. Third scenario, you're working somewhere and you're working for like a small company in some country. Maybe you're teaching English, maybe you're teaching math, maybe you're just doing IT work. You just went overseas to do IT work, and then you found out about working in international education and you got into it that way. This small company never actually employs you properly, and you don't realize that, and there's a problem when you try to get your background check. Whatever. I've heard different scenarios. It's possible it can happen. Or for some reason you took a job somewhere that refuses to provide them. I guess that's possible. In cases like this, your only option is first contact the company that you're working for, that you were working for, if they still exist, and ask them if they can provide a letter of good standing. You want to look up a letter of good standing format online. I'll put a copy in the show notes. You want to ask them if they can provide the letter and stamp it and sign it. That's really the only thing you can do. And then you have to ask your HR department that you're going to if they'll accept it, and they may or they may not. There are companies that provide background checks, and these companies usually work on behalf of employers, but you could do this as well. And I'll put some links in the show notes for companies that do this. So they have services and fees, and you pay those, and then they run a background check on you. In order to do that, they have to have your ID numbers and other bits of information about your visa from where you used to work. And then they basically use that to process a background check. And they produce a background check for every place that you worked in one document. That sounds great, but your HR has to accept it. So if you have to go that route, you do need to clarify with your HR department first. Hey, I can't get my background check for these reasons. Will you take this background check from this company? And you can send them information and hopefully they'll do it. Now, I think some people may have heard me say, oh, I can get a letter of good standing and that's enough. No, I did not say that. If you're in a situation where you can't get a background check, you probably can't get the letter of good standing, but if the company still exists, you might be able to. However, something I've always done is before I leave a job, I either ask for a letter of good standing from the head of the school or the HR department or an open letter of reference. So if you want a letter of good standing, you need to find a format. You need to set up a meeting with HR and just say, I've been advised by my recruitment agent, I've been advised by other people who've been working abroad that it's good to have one of these. Here's the format. You don't need to do anything. I've already printed it out on the school's letterhead for you. Please get a hold of the letterhead, get all this ready. So print out 2 copies of this. Don't walk into the meeting asking them to do work for you. That is a mistake. You need to do all of this yourself. Letter of good standing, you ask HR if they can have it signed and stamped by the school so that you have it. That's it. If you ask them to make one for you, you're probably going to get rejected if they don't do it as part of a normal process. There's a few other things to note which come up that can cause a lot of issues getting any of this paperwork done. The first one is notarization. Most countries have a notarization process. So let's say that you want to open an account somewhere like Korea. They're going to have an internal process within the country for you to get documents notarized for Korean business purposes. But if I need something notarized for the Canadian embassy in Seoul, I need someone who is a notary from Canada. Canada has to have issued them the ability to be a notary. If I need something notarized for the United States, I need a U.S. notary. I can't just go to a Korean one or a Chinese one and say, here, notarize this. It's not going to work. Notarization in certain remote parts of the world can be very difficult, if not impossible. And if the first step in your process is notarization, and the notarization has to be validated from the country that the background check is going to. So, for example, you need FBI background check, you need something notarized by a U.S. notary, and that U.S. notary isn't available in your country. There's no embassy service for you to get to. Then you can't do anything until you get things notarized. Now, there are online notarization processes and procedures, but you have to be very careful and make sure that as you're going through this, you're getting notarizations that are recognized and that are acceptable. Some of these online processes aren't actually acceptable. I used a notarization service to have my Korean license translated to English and stamped. And I did that online and I researched it very thoroughly and it was accepted and it was fine. And I did that because when I landed back in the US, my US license was expired, but my Korean license wasn't. So I wanted to rent a car. So I called like Enterprise Rent-A-Car and Hertz. I called different companies and asked them the same question. And all of them were like, yeah, if you have a translated version of your Korean license and it's notarized, we'll accept it. So then I found different companies, and then I found companies that people had used and they'd given reviews for. Like I had it notarized, we used it, it was no problem. And then I narrowed down my options. But you might find that some forms of notarization or some forms of ID verification are just not accepted. And that's why it's really important when you're looking at moving from country to country and school to school that you consider that the summer is really when you might have to do a lot of this work. And you can't start it in the summer. You start it way before then. You get everything organized. You do everything you can before you hit the ground. And the day you hit the ground, you know exactly where you're going and what you're doing. If you start your research when you get back, you'll never get finished. My final bit of commentary on this is around embassies and consulates. I often am frustrated with the lack of services that embassies and consulates offer, but you need to check your embassy and consulate. So let's say you're British, you want to check with the British embassy or consulate. If you're American, the American embassy or consulate. You want to check with them in the country you're living in now to see if they offer any services that can help you. They usually can't do background checks for you of any kind, but sometimes they do notarization. Sometimes they help with fingerprints. You never know. You should always look up the services. Thanks for listening to TDK12.net, episode 14. police background checks. Please feel free to send me questions, correct me, add comments. This is all complicated. If you have personal stories about background checks you've gone through, if you email me the story, I will read it in episode 15 so people can hear your story, and I will keep all of your information anonymous.